Every single year, there are players in fantasy who end up disappointing their ADP, and they're the guys who are going to lose you your leagues. Last year, some of those guys were ones that I predicted, like CJ Stroud, whose ADP was quarterback 5, but finished as the quarterback 18. Patrick Mahomes, whose ADP was quarterback 2, but ended up finishing as the quarterback 11. Travis Etienne, who had an ADP of RB 8, and of course, we know how that one went. He finished as the RB 35. And then a guy like Raheem Mostert, who had an ADP of RB 25, but he ended up finishing as the RB 56. And this year, there are definitely some guys who have an ADP that to me is just absurd, and those guys are going to be the ones who lose you your draft if you do end up drafting them. But I'm going to tell you who these guys are so that you can avoid them and actually win your leagues this year. Now, the first guy up is one that had a regression last year, and that was Tyreek Hill. His current ADP is wide receiver 12. He goes between wide receiver 12 to 15, but this is a guy I would definitely avoid. He's entering his age 31 season, and historically only 3 wide receivers at age 31 or older have outperformed their points per game at age 30. These guys were Reggie Wayne, Larry Fitzgerald, and Julian Edelman. So of course these are legends, and Tyreek Hill could be one of those guys on the list to be the 4th receiver, but I'm not hopeful at this point. Historically, only about 1 in 5 receivers bounce back to a top 20 receiver after having a year of regression, and Tyreek Hill, he's just going to have to beat the odds. Especially at his age, this is a guy that I'm not really interested in, especially where he is going. In 2024, Tyreek had 123 targets, and yes, not all of these came from Tua, but he did start 11 of those games, and through those he had 81 receptions, which is the exact same as Courtland Sutton. Now, Sutton had 120 more yards though, and he finished 3 spots ahead of Tyreek, and you can actually grab Sutton 2 rounds later than Tyreek Hill, which at this value is definitely the guy that I would much rather target. That 2 rounds of value is going to make a huge difference, especially at this point in the draft where it's early on. And now we have Tyreek, who is dealing with another injury, and there's even rumors of him being traded. He's just super volatile, and at his ADP, I'm not touching a guy like that, especially when he only produces when he actually has a quarterback who tends to get a lot of concussions. In my eyes, his best case scenario is that he slightly beats his ADP and maybe finishes around the wide receiver 8 to 10 range, but his worst case scenario is he absolutely falls off a cliff, and that is not a guy that you want to be taking a shot at. Especially with how good some of these alternative picks are around his ADP. You can get a guy like Chase Brown, who is currently my most targeted player in drafts at this range. You can also get a guy like T. Higgins, who if he stays healthy will definitely outproduce Tyreek, or you can get a guy like Jackson Smith in Jigba, a guy that I am targeting if he falls a little bit in drafts, and then a guy like Garrett Wilson, who will be peppered with targets this year. So Tyreek is the number 1 guy that I'm avoiding at all costs. The second guy I'm avoiding is James Cook, who's currently going as the running back 13 in ADP. Now, a lot of guys are going to be talking about James Cook this offseason and why you should avoid him, and that's for a good reason. He's extremely touchdown reliant, and for fantasy production, that's not what you want, especially with how sticky of a stat that is. He scored 18 total touchdowns last year, which is highly, highly unsustainable. And based on historical regression trends, there's only about a 10% chance that he ever gets back to having 18 touchdowns, and I just highly doubt it. Not to mention that Ray Davis is now going into year 2, and he's definitely going to cut a little bit more into James Cook's usage. Now, I still expect James Cook to be the RB1, but with all the drama that's going on right now and him whining about wanting a new contract, he's just a guy that I definitely am not going to be taking, especially at the running back 13 price. I mean, you can grab a guy like Chuba Hubbard right around the same range, and even James Conner. I would rather have both those guys over James Cook. If you want to pivot to a receiver, you got guys like DK Metcalf, who I believe with Aaron Rodgers, he could be sneaky good this year. And the third guy on this list is going to be Terry McLaurin, who's currently going at wide receiver 17 in ADP. For a similar reason to James Cook, his touchdowns are just not sustainable. Last year, he had a career high of 13 touchdowns when his previous career high was only 7, so nearly double that. He also had a career high catch rate at 70%, which are both very unsustainable. Historically, guys who absolutely destroy their previous record for touchdowns, especially this late in their career, they usually regress, and I'd expect Terry to be around that 6 to 7 touchdowns total range, and I just don't think he's going to get back to 13. Especially when you consider the fact that Deebo Samuel is now in the mix, who's definitely going to take some more of those targets, and right now Terry's not even practicing, so I think that Deebo is actually going to take a lot more than we think. I'm also pretty bullish on Ben Sinnott and Zach Ertz, and between the 2 tight ends, I think that they're going to take a lot more volume than people actually think, so Terry McLaurin, just don't draft him. There's a few guys who are going around this pick that I would definitely target, like Devontae Adams, who's going a little bit ahead, but he does tend to drop in some of these drafts, so I would take him, as well as Marvin Harrison Jr. I have no idea how they're going around the same price, and Of course, a Marion Hampton, a guy that I'm super hyped for this season. He could be dominant with the Chargers. So take those guys instead of Terry. It's an easy pick for me. And the fourth guy that I'm going to be avoiding is Sam LaPorta, who's currently going off the board as the tight end 4 in current ADP. I think he's my tight end 5, and I don't hate Sam LaPorta, but his ADP is extremely high for his role and for his ceiling, really. The first thing to consider is Ben Johnson is gone, which is going to shift the identity of this offense. You also have Jameson Williams, who started to step up last season and soak up some of those targets, and he's expected to take another step, and just spoiler alert, he may be one of my guys this year. Detroit also just drafted a guy in the 3rd round who's another receiver to be added to the mix, which is Isaac Tesla, or however you want to say his name. So it's just getting busier, and with Ben Johnson gone, this is a guy who I think has a lower floor than people are willing to admit, and at tight end 4, currently going where he's going, it's a pretty crazy price tag. He only averaged 10.9 fantasy points per game despite having a reasonably heavy usage and being involved in most of the snaps last year. And he's outside of those top 3 tight ends who you want to take early and who I'm actually okay with taking early, which is Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and George Kittle. Those guys are just going to be good. And at the tight end position, those are the guys you're going to want. And if you don't grab them, make sure you wait and grab a guy later. I mean, some of the guys going around him are kind of crazy. The alternative picks here are Cortland Sutton, Devonta Smith, Jameson Williams, who I'm all okay with being my wide receiver 2. And if they're your wide receiver 3, that's just great. As well as you have a guy like Trevion Henderson, a guy with a very high upside at running back. And then if you want to solidify your quarterback 1, you have a guy like Patrick Mahomes, but I'm probably not going to be drafting him. But if you do want to take a guy like him, you can here instead of Sam LaPorta. And speaking of quarterbacks, I have my second line here, which is Jared Goff, who's currently going as a quarterback 10 in ADP. Now, I don't hate Jared Goff. I'm not a hater of him. I think that he's a solid quarterback, but at quarterback 10, that's basically near his ceiling, and I think it's pretty absurd. This is not a great value pick. He also lost Ben Johnson, of course, and I would expect to see some heavy touchdown regression. He had 37 passing touchdowns last year, as well as 1 receiving, but we don't need to talk about that. But I would expect him to actually kind of go back to what he did in 2019 when he had 4,600 yards, but only 22 passing touchdowns. So I can still see them going through the air a lot, and I think Jared Goff will get those yards, but at that point, he only finished as a quarterback 13 with the similar yardage and lower scoring. My best case scenario, I think, would be quarterback 6, which it seems like that's his best ceiling because he's done that twice in his career now, and that has been the top 2 finishes he's ever had in his career. But he's going at pick 96 in round 8. I would expect him to finish more around that QB 13 to QB 16 range, and there's just better guys for upside at this point in the draft. You can grab some great upside depth pieces and then actually wait a little bit and get quarterback later. So some alternative picks you have here are Juwan Jennings, Jaden Reed, Ricky Pearsall, all guys that are very high ceiling for a wide receiver, especially for depth. And then you have a guy that you can reach on like Josh Downs, who I'm very high on this year, or Emeka Egbuka, who is rising up boards very fast. You can also reach on a tight end if you really want one here, like Tyler Warren or David Njoku, both guys that I think have a shot to go up a tier in the rankings. And there's even higher upside quarterbacks who still have a safe floor later on. Like you can take Dak Prescott in the 9th, which is crazy value, or Drake May in the 10th, which is also insane value. So Jared Goff in the 9th, I'm not taking that. So those are my top 5 players to avoid in your draft. So make sure you write them down and remember it for draft day. And also hit that like button, subscribe for more content to come. I'm going to be dropping a ton of content throughout the season as well as leading up to the draft. So make sure you follow for more. And remember to come back to this video when you win your league and, thank me later.